What's good, everyone? Welcome into Context Sports. In this episode, we are going to be talking about the 5 head coach firings since the end of the 2023 NFL season. I've got the latest, and keep in mind, these are only the 5 head coaches that got fired after the season. We're not talking about Brandon Staley or Josh McDaniels. We are talking about Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll, Mike Vrabel, Ron Rivera, and Arthur Smith. So I'm going to be giving my thoughts on all these firings, talking about why they happened, and in one of the cases, a new head coach has already been hired. So let's run through this. The first one is that the New England Patriots have parted ways with Bill Belichick after 24 seasons, I believe. And the reason why the Patriots are moving off of Belichick, the Patriots' last 2 seasons have been nothing short of disappointing. Obviously, this season they finished 4-13. And last season, I believe, they finished 8-9. The last time they made the playoffs, 2021, when they did make the playoffs, but Mac Jones, his development was ruined, and a lot of that blame was placed on Bill Belichick, and especially not finding competent offensive coordinators until it was too late. And this past season, the personnel on the Patriots roster was too hard for offensive coordinator Bill O'Brien to overcome that. So Mac Jones' development was killed. More reasons why is, I touched on it earlier, the lack, or should I say, the bad player personnel decisions that Bill Belichick has made lately. Because not only was Bill Belichick the head coach, he was also the general manager. So he assembled this Patriots roster. And because of that, he can't have that excuse of, well, I didn't choose these players. No, Bill Belichick chose the players on offense, on defense, and on special teams. And because the Patriots have not produced these past 2 seasons to the caliber that owner Robert Kraft wanted, that alone was a major reason for Bill Belichick's firing, because he has not made good decisions. I mean, you can think about last offseason signing Juju Smith-Schuster to a pretty sizable deal, and that looks like a colossal disappointment, but the offense is the main reason why. Bill Belichick, he just can't do it. Now, do I think it was the right move? I'm going to say I can understand it, but I don't necessarily think it is the right move. If I were the Patriots, what I would have done is I would have at least tried to see if Bill Belichick would have given up general manager duties. I think that would have really helped him, because on the field, I still think Bill Belichick is an elite head coach. His resume speaks for itself, and you could say whatnot about he's nothing with Tom Brady. I think that's a bad argument, because you could look at his time with the New York Giants as defensive coordinator. You could look at him as the Cleveland Browns head coach. I mean, he was the last Browns head coach to get a playoff win until 2020 when Kevin Stefanski got one. So he was doing work in Cleveland of all places too. Jets defensive coordinator for a while, didn't end up being the head coach. We already know that. But see, what I don't get is that Bill Belichick, he still had a pretty good Patriots defense, and the Patriots defense was really injured. I mean, once they lost Christian Gonzalez, their defense, it took a little bit of a hit for the first few weeks after his injury in 2023, but there were 3 games where the Patriots gave up 10 or less points, and they lost all of them. So Bill Belichick, he's still one of the top, if not the top defensive mind in the NFL still. Now, obviously, his personnel decisions as a general manager are not good anymore. He's past his prime. He cannot assemble a fully competent roster on all 3 levels of the football field, and that's why he's getting canned. But Jerod Mayo, he was just announced today that he will be the new Patriots head coach. He obviously played under Bill Belichick. He's highly respected by the players. Robert Kraft actually signed in Mayo's contract this past offseason a clause to where the Patriots could promote him to head coach without having to undergo this lengthy process. And, well, that's what they just did. So I am excited about Jerod Mayo. He will bring a younger and fresher perspective to the team. But I feel like what the Patriots really need right now is an offensive mind, because their offense has been disappointing the last few seasons, and that's what's really holding them back. So I don't really understand firing a 6-time Super Bowl winning defensive-minded head coach to replace him with one of his students who hasn't even head coached a game before. I don't really get that philosophy, why you'd move on from Bill to go to Jerod Mayo. But who knows? You know what? I could see the writing being on the wall, but I will say this. Bill Belichick will be extremely coveted as a head coach, and for good reason. But I can't understand Robert Kraft being frustrated over the past few seasons. And if Bill Belichick was not willing to relinquish his general manager duties, then you know what? I think this was the right move for the New England Patriots. I'm just not too sure about the guy who they replaced him with. So that was the big news. And before Bill Belichick parted ways with the Patriots, Pete Carroll parted ways with the Seattle Seahawks too. They essentially demoted him. Pete Carroll, he has not won a playoff game since 2019. The Seahawks, they're always a competitive team. They're always in the playoff mix. You feel like they're at least competing for a wild card spot. They had a great season in 2022 with Geno Smith and how that team, with little expectation, they made the playoffs. They just had to face the 49er juggernaut. But this past season, the Seahawks started 6-3, and then they collapsed. Well, not necessarily collapsed, but they finished 9-8, I believe, but that it was not enough to get them into the playoffs. And it's because the Seahawks lost about, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 games in a row. It was a bad and ugly stretch. They lost a must-win home game to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So with Pete Carroll, he's on the older side, but it looks like he still wants to keep coaching. He's in an advisory role at this moment with the Seahawks. But with Pete Carroll, the no playoff win since 2019 was a big factor. And even when the Seahawks made the playoffs, at least since 2019, you kind of knew that they weren't really going to be making serious noise come the playoffs. And I think what ties into that is that the Seahawks have already reached their ceiling with Pete Carroll as head coach. He's already reached his prime. Back in the day, his defenses were great. That's a huge reason why the Seahawks went to the Super Bowl 2 times and they won it once. But the last few years, the defense in Seattle has been very shaky and questionable. Despite a lot of talented defensive players on that team, they're just simply nowhere near as effective as the players and defenses that Pete Carroll ran back in the earlier days. I'd say up to 2017, honestly, at that point. And another thing with Pete Carroll is the offense was always inconsistent, or the Seahawks as a whole were inconsistent, because with Pete Carroll, you'd see weeks where the offense would play pretty well for Seattle, but then you'd see the defense. They would not be playing well, or vice versa. The defense would actually be playing pretty well, holding teams to under 20, 18 points, but then the offense would have 13 points by the fourth quarter, and you're like, come on, this is a winnable game, but the offense just isn't clicking. And the Seahawks this past season, they had way too much offensive talent to be as inconsistent as they were this past season. So, you know what, from the Seahawks, was it the right decision to move on from Pete Carroll? I'm going to be saying yes, because at this point in time and for the foreseeable future, if Pete Carroll stayed with the Seahawks, I could have never seen them winning, let alone making another Super Bowl with Pete Carroll. They definitely reached their ceiling and their peak, and it's a tough decision for the owner for sure, because Pete Carroll's been a legend in Seattle, but it was time to move on as the future looms. They have to do what's best for the team, and what's best for the team is anything that increases their odds to make a Super Bowl push, and that's what they're doing. So Pete Carroll, big departure. Another big, this is the first official head coach firing, is the Tennessee Titans fired Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel, ever since he got fired, there has been a lot of buzz. He is also going to be in that same realm as Bill Belichick, where he's going to be highly, highly coveted. Now, Mike Vrabel had success very early on with the Tennessee Titans. You can think about that 2019 Titans team that made it all the way to the AFC Championship game and that upset Lamar Jackson in his MVP season, or his first MVP season. The Titans, they were close, but they could not close out against the Chiefs. But the Titans, their roster overall, I wouldn't say it was too good. And that's what maybe made Mike Vrabel's coaching job more impressive in Tennessee. And that's why this firing surprised a lot of people. Because a big argument is that, he hasn't really had a good roster put around him. And the general managers around him have not been good at all. We can clearly look back to the A.J. Brown trade, where Mike Vrabel was visibly not in favor of trading away Brown, and ultimately Vrabel knew he made the right decision. You could think about the Titans GM drafting Isaiah Wilson in the first round and him only playing one game, I believe. He's had to endure terrible general managers, and he did not see eye to eye with this current general manager who they hired. I think it was last offseason. So it was a little bit of a power struggle, and ultimately the new general manager won. So also, Mike Vrabel also got fired because last season in 2022, the Titans were 7-4. They were in the lead for the AFC South, and they collapsed. I think they lost their remaining game. The Tennessee Titans, they lost out. They were 7-4, and they finished 7-10. If you remember that win-and-getting game at Jacksonville I think that was the last game of the NFL season in 2022. The Titans lost in that game, and then going 6-11 in 2023 was disappointing for sure. But to be fair, the roster in Tennessee was not too good, and Ryan Tannehill, he's been pretty washed, at least since 2022, if you ask me. Derrick Henry, he's also slowing down. He's nowhere near the same impact elite player he once was. And then Mike Vrabel having to deal with a rookie quarterback in Will Levis. So the circumstances around Mike Vrabel were not good, and that's why there's a lot of pushback on firing Mike Vrabel. And you know what? I am going to agree with that. I think Mike Vrabel is a good head coach. And for the Tennessee Titans, right now where that franchise sits, they you could look at Will Levis, but really, they still need a franchise quarterback. There's no guarantees about Will Levis. The general manager has made questionable decisions. He just won a power struggle. The Titans are going to be letting go of Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill. It looks like it's full-on rebuild time in Tennessee. And if you're a new head coach, I don't really see Tennessee being a more intriguing or enticing opportunity than, say, the Atlanta Falcons or the Washington Commanders. So for that reason, I don't agree with the Titans firing Mike Vrabel at all. I don't think it was the right choice. And I think if the Titans had better general managers during Mike Vrabel's tenure who could have built a competent roster, or at least above average roster, I could totally have seen more success with Mike Vrabel. And another point to mention is that the Titans' defense has always been good when Vrabel has been as the Titans head coach. That's his bread and butter, the defense. He was a defensive coordinator before he got hired as head coach, and he carried over that successful defense to Tennessee. So he's good at what he does and what he specializes in, the defense, but the offensive struggles are part of the reason why, and as the head coach, you take responsibility for when your team loses, such as the 6-game losing, actually, it might have been a 7-game losing streak to end 2022, now that I think about that, and then finishing 6-11 this past season in 2023. But I think out of all of the head coach firings, this one, Mike Vrabel, is the one that will be talked about the most come a few years later. And whenever Mike Vrabel is coaching his new football team, the Tennessee Titans and their owner may regret firing Mike Vrabel, and instead, they should have probably given him another year or replaced the general manager. And now we go to a head coach who was expected to be fired, let's be honest. The last two, they were both, everyone with football knowledge knew that both of them, their time was up. Let's start with Ron Rivera. The Washington Commanders have fired Ron Rivera after 4 seasons. With Ron Rivera, the Commanders, they only had 1 season where they made the playoffs. That was in 2020, the COVID year. And even when they did make the playoffs that year, it was because their division was so bad. The Commanders finished 7-9. So it's not like even in Rivera's lone playoff season, it wasn't like he was fielding a very good team all around. No, they had a losing record, and they snuck into the playoffs. Now, they did play the Bucs pretty competitively. We all remember that for that being the Taylor Heineke game. But ever since then, it's been downhill for the Commanders, and it's been inconsistent. 2021, the defense took a step back. 2022, they were in the mix, but the quarterback position was a problem in Washington. And you can look back to 2022 when Ron Rivera did not know that the Washington Commanders were eliminated from the playoffs after they lost to the Cleveland Browns. That's a bad look when your head coach does not know when your team can be eliminated from the playoffs, because where's that sense of urgency then if your coach isn't even aware of when the season can truly become lost at that point? And then obviously 2023, the Commanders' defense was historically bad. It was awful. Emmanuel Forbes has not looked good. Jamin Davis has regressed since his drafting in 2021 or 2020, I believe. So there's been limited player development with Ron Rivera. That's truly been the story. And it seems like this past season, Eric Bieniemy was the best coach on the Washington Commanders. And if anything, he probably should have deserved to be head coach over Ron Rivera, because maybe you would have seen a more competitive team at that point. But yeah, Ron Rivera, he's past his prime. So the Washington Commanders, they also have this 2nd overall pick in the draft. Will they keep Sam Howell? I'm guessing most likely not now, although I still think he is a very competent quarterback who's just put in a little bit of a tough situation around a bad team. Now, the offensive skill players in Washington, they are pretty solid. They are pretty good, so I will say that. But if you're a new head coach, having the 2nd overall pick in the draft is very enticing, whether you're talking about drafting a guy like Drake May or Jaden Daniels, or potentially trading up to the first overall pick to get Caleb Williams. So from the Commanders' perspective, there's no point in keeping Ron Rivera when you could have the ability to lure in a guy like Ben Johnson from the Detroit Lions, who can really maximize this offense and potentially start a sustainable winning culture in Washington, something that has not happened before Dan Snyder took over. So Ron Rivera's firing, it makes a lot of sense. And there were also too many games where the Commanders, it just seemed like they got blown out. And that's a poor indictment on coaching. And that lies on Ron Rivera himself. So do I agree with the Commanders firing Ron Rivera? Heck, yes, I do. It was about time. You have all these intriguing resources. You have some very good cornerstone players on the Commanders, a new head coach paired with a new general manager. It's what you want. And there's no point in forcing a new general manager to keep Ron Rivera, who at this point now, or last season, was a bottom head coach in the National Football League. And that brings us to our last head coach who was fired. The first one, the minute it turned Monday, his firing was announced. So this was brutal. But Arthur Smith has been fired from the Atlanta Falcons as head coach after 3 7-10 seasons in a row. In all of them, I believe they had the 8th overall pick too, which is really, really weird. So I guess Arthur Smith was consistent at losing, but consistent at getting decent draft position. But that's not how you keep your job as a head coach. You keep your job by winning games and making the playoffs. And this past season, the Atlanta Falcons, they had the easiest strength of schedule out of any team in the National Football League. I believe it was under 430, which is extremely low. You can go on Tankathon to check the strength of schedules, but the Falcons had such a winnable schedule, and they could not win with this cakewalk schedule. They lost to the Carolina Panthers. They were one of 2 teams to lose to the Panthers. That's not a good look at all. And what's also not a good look is that all of these players that Arthur Smith has drafted with the 8th overall pick, specifically on offense, which is what Arthur Smith was hired to come and coach, the offense. He did not utilize his first-round talent properly. He was giving players of significantly less talent more opportunities than these high draft picks. So it felt like he was wasting the potential with Kyle Pitts and his big size and big body, and Drake London with his big size and great ability for jump balls as a number 1 wide receiver. In this past year, Bijan Robinson. Instead, he would be giving the ball to Cordero Patterson and sometimes even Tyler Algier more than Bijan Robinson. It was a nightmare for the Atlanta Falcons. And you know what else was a nightmare for the Falcons? The quarterback position. That's one thing that Arthur Smith could not get right no matter what. He had Matt Ryan his first year, and then they parted ways, the Falcons and Matt Ryan. Second year, Marcus Mariota, that didn't really work out at all either. Then Desmond Ridder had a decent finish to end the 2022 season. This season, though, Desmond Ridder, no good. No good. And even Taylor Heineke, who I think is a pretty quality backup quarterback, he struggled in Arthur Smith's system. So the offense was the main reason for his firing. And also, let me mention, when Arthur Smith blew up at the end of that Week 18 loss versus the New Orleans Saints, at that very moment, you knew he was going to get fired. I know that's not just me. That was an extremely unprofessional look, even if I do understand some of the frustration for why Smith was mad at the Saints scoring a touchdown. But the writing was on the wall for Arthur Smith. Feels like even casual football fans knew that the Atlanta Falcons had too much offensive talent to be this inconsistent and overall pretty bad. And Arthur Blank, the Falcons owner, he was deciding on whether to fire him or not. He would have kept Arthur Smith if the Falcons didn't lose their last 3 games to end the season, I believe. So, man, it's really bad for Arthur Smith. He will be looked at as one of the more disappointing head coaches when you take a look at the past 4 seasons, given the players that were in his possession in Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, and Drake London. So, do I agree with the Falcons firing Arthur Smith? I do. I do agree that offense has way too much talent to be that misutilized and to be that disappointing, for a lack of a better word. So, those are the head coaching firings from the 2023, or the results of the 2023 season. And yeah, I'm assuming these are all the last ones. Bill Belichick was the last coach to be fired. I don't see a scenario where any other coaches get fired, except sneak peek, if the Cowboys lose in the first round of the playoffs, Bill Belichick could replace Mike McCarthy as the Cowboys head coach. So then it would make Mike McCarthy getting fired. I don't expect Nick Sirianni to get fired because with Nick Sirianni, yes, this season has been a disappointment. But when you look at when the Eagles went to the Super Bowl in 2022, the Eagles had two of the best coordinators that season in the NFL. Both of them got hired as head coaches. So Nick Sirianni had to have some of the younger, more inexperienced guys take over those coordinator roles. And it's kind of hard to expect the Eagles to maintain that same level of success when their coordinators in the Super Bowl run were so much better that they got hired to be head coaches. There was a noticeable drop-off this past season. I think Nick Sirianni has to get rid of Brian Johnson as offensive coordinator, obviously, and find a real defensive coordinator too. But I think you should give him at least one more season to get the coordinator position right, because when he does, we could see how good the Eagles are. So yeah, that's it for this episode. I'm finally back. I plan to make more podcast content. I know I've been away for a little bit, and I appreciate you if you've listened all the way through. I genuinely do. Let me know in the comment section if you're on YouTube, or tweet me at ACEZ_ET on Twitter. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk some football. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on the next podcast episode.